Dr. Virtue is a practicing dentist in Yadkinville, North Carolina. He graduated from Indiana University Dental School. In 2010, he became board certified as a naturopathic physician with the American College of Integrative Medicine and Dentistry. He was our president in 2012. He received his fellowship and is the current secretary on the executive council. Dr. Bill Virtue, come on up.
It's a pleasure to be here. Joe and I have been doing this together for, I'm going to say, 6 years or so, and it's always a good time. We've become very good friends doing it. As I said, Cole said, I was a graduate of Indiana in '79. Anybody here from Indiana? No Hoosiers? No, bummer. But I've been in North Carolina since 1979 in a little town called Yadkinville, which is outside of Winston-Salem. And we've had the pleasure of doing this together. And I just want to say a little bit about my experience and to get started here. Welcome all of you to this organization. This is an absolutely phenomenal group of people, and you'll meet them over the next couple days. And our goal, honestly, is to get you to join the academy and get you accredited, because we're changing the world by removing mercury and by eliminating fluoride. One of the things that you've got to realize is that if you put mercury in somebody's mouth, you're putting it in the environment. So here in Vermont, environmental capital of the world, if you're at all interested in the environment, then don't put it in somebody's mouth, for sure. We all graduated from great dental schools, and we all came out, at least I did in '79, thinking that mercury fillings were just fine. Now, we also at that time had to put our scrap in a little bowl with oil over it, or a jar, I guess it was. Never explained to us why we had to do that, but we never got any education on the bad things about mercury, why maybe we shouldn't use it. And you have to change your mind about that, and maybe over the next couple of days you will. What we'll be doing over the next 3 days, today included, is presenting science, basically, and what you're going to experience. Hopefully you'll be here for Friday and Saturday, or not only dentists lecturing, but PhD chemists and people from around the world that will be having different aspects of mercury poisoning, maybe periodontal, and also fluoride. So keep an open mind, please. 3 best things I did for myself in dentistry, not necessarily in this order, but chronologically they were, was the Pankey Institute years ago. Went through all 6 phases of that. It's changed now a bit. Also got involved. Joe and I met at a group called Bob Willis's group that changed how we present dentistry, how we pay our staff a more fair way. And the presentation of dentistry caused me to go to the Pankey, because now that I could present dentistry and have it be accepted, I had to figure out how to do it. And then third thing was the IAOMT, which changed not only my life, but the life of our patient and staff. Now, if you listen to what we're going to say over the next several days, and you're going to think, how in the world am I going to go home and do this? It is a paradigm shift. I'm going to tell you the truth. It's a big one. A lot different than going to Pankey. It's a whole different way of looking at things. And your staff's going to look at you and go, you're crazy. We've been doing it all this same way all these years. Why are we changing it now? Your colleagues are going to look at you and think, man, you've changed to the dark side. You can't do this. And your staff, or your patients too, are going to wonder, why is this important now and it wasn't last year when we did this filling? So a lot of things you're going to have to think about and change, but they're all worthwhile. Trust me on that. Don't let it scare you. I mean, there's a lot of information, as Griff said, over the next couple of days that may be new to you, maybe not. Maybe you've been thinking about it and now you finally made the decision to change. But at any rate, we're going to present some good stuff, I hope, for you. I have trouble with pointers and stuff for the slides, so if we bounce around a little bit, that's just par for the course. So we'll get started. This group was started back in 1984 by several like-minded people. That's a long time ago to be thinking about mercury poisoning. I know I wasn't. I was an ADA guy. I thought, man, there's whatever they say is the truth. And maybe it's a little bit like the tobacco companies. Being from Winston-Salem, I'm the hometown of RJ Reynolds. And if you remember several years back, there was a lot of controversy about Reynolds getting sued, tobacco companies getting sued, because they knew the truth but wouldn't speak it. They knew nicotine was addictive. They knew cigarettes weren't good for you. When I was a kid, I mean, cigarettes were called coffin nails. So we knew back then they weren't good for you. But Reynolds got in trouble because they knew the truth and suppressed it. And that may be a little bit what's going on with organized dentistry right now. Can't say for sure, but maybe it is. We have a couple members. Dave Reggiani, I know for sure, is in this group. He's still here. and Vinnie Murray's still alive. I can't pick up all these guys, but at any rate, we now over 800 members, and started with about 12. So when I was president, I guess it was 8 years ago, Griff, when you said that, I didn't realize it was that long. We had about 600, so we're growing well. And all that time, I've also served as not only secretary, but as a mentor. So if you look around, you see these, I don't have my thing on because it interferes with the light. If you see somebody with a mentor badge on, that's somebody you can go up to and ask questions to. You can ask questions to any of us. But mentor program is meant to help people that maybe are in your situation, you got questions, you don't know what to do, you don't know how to get started. Well, the mentors are folks you can call and help with get guidance, answer questions, how to get started. What do I do with this? How do I do that? So we're here to help, and there's a number of us that do that. So don't be afraid to come up and ask us questions. We're here to help you. As I said, our goal is to get you to join the academy, and our goal is to get you accredited. So we'll be blunt about that. The IAOMT is a trusted academy of allied professionals providing scientific resources to support new levels of integrity and safety in healthcare. Now, one of the criticisms we've had in the past when you do your critiques is that we had to read the slides. What you're going to find out is a lot of information on these slides, and it's difficult to memorize them and stand here and just reverberate without looking at the slides. So if I read some of these a bit, it's because there's a lot of information here, and I apologize for that. The information you hear at our meeting is derived from science, delivered by clinicians, research scientists, and health professionals that are committed to improving and making healthcare safer for patients and the environment. Notice the environment part. Years ago, we were trying to change dentists' minds by showing them the science of why mercury vapor is not good for them, the dentist, the staff member, the assistant sitting there all day, the hygienist polishing mercury amalgams, or the patient. But it was a hard sell because nobody was dropping dead from mercury poisoning. But one of the aspects you might want to look at, and I think it really rang a bell, is the environmental aspect of it, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But if you put it in somebody's mouth, it's there. They're either exhaling mercury vapor. When they die, they either get cremated or buried, so it either goes into the air or goes into the soil. So once it's in the mouth, it's in the environment. So think of it that way if you have any problems with the health aspects of it. Disclaimer, the material presented here is intended strictly as a set of suggestions. A licensed practitioner must make up his own mind concerning specific treatment options. All right, biological dentist, not a separate recognized specialty of dentistry. It's not. We call it biological dentistry, maybe someday it will be. But it's thought process and an attitude that can apply to all facets of dental practice. In other words, when we think of biologic dentistry, I think of what am I doing for my patient other than filling a hole in his head? And that's kind of what the dental mentality is. I've got a tooth, I'm going to fix it without any regards to what it's doing to perhaps to the rest of the body. Now, you can think of occlusion and TMD and all that kind of thing, and it bites off. But what we're concerned about is what that mercury filling or whatever material you put in that body, what it's doing to the body. And there's testing you can do. I think Joe will talk about that a little later, that you can actually have your patients blood tested to see what they're reactive to or not reactive to. We do that with a lot of patients, and we get a list back, 5,000 plus dental materials out there, and they tell us what etch we can use, what bonding liquid we can use, what filling material we can use, and we just go by and check, and then we design that treatment plan around that patient. So it's just not putting filling in a tooth, it's putting health in a patient's body. So this is just a little bit of background on me. If anybody, one of the great things about this academy is that there are offshoots of more learning. And Phil Malika, which he'll be teaching perio later today, real great lecture along with David Kennedy. But he's got an academy up in Settlebrook, New Jersey that Joe and I attended. I guess it was 8 years ago, Joe. Listen to Griff again. Time goes by. That you can become certified in biological dentistry, and if you wish, you can become a naturopath. Very interesting course. That's a little bit of my history. Not that it's all that important, but maybe it'll relate to somebody here, or maybe many of you here. I got involved in interest in mercury 20 years ago, probably, and maybe more than that. I had an Aunt Vi. My whole family grew up in a place called outside of Camden, New Jersey. Anybody know where Camden is? Great place to be from. Um, what a rough place. But I grew up in Woodbury, New Jersey, in South Jersey, really nice little town. And my father's brother married my mother's sister. So does that make sense? So, I got double first cousins, and we all look about alike. Um, but my Aunt Vi, my mom's youngest sister, had Lou Gehrig's disease. And when she came down from Jersey to North Carolina to visit, she had obvious symptoms of it. And when she laughed, which she constantly did, she was always laughing, opened her mouth and all of her teeth, posterior teeth, were all black from mercury fillings. Notice I'm calling them mercury, not amalgams or silver, but they're mercury. And I got looking at that thinking, wow, this is weird. Aunt Vi's got all these black mercury fillings. At the time I called them amalgam. And Lou Gehrig's. Well, since then she died. 3 of my cousins, her siblings, have died, her children. So that told me I either better figure out a different way of doing dentistry or find a new profession. So that's when I met the IAOMT. My first meeting was in Duke University 20-some years ago. And I walked into this room much smaller than this and much fewer people. And it was the weirdest meeting I've ever been to in dentistry. There was no pictures of teeth, and you probably won't see many today either, tomorrow. But they were kooks to me. They were doing dentistry without mercury, and they were doing no fluoride, and they were concerned about what anesthetics were being used. And they were making vinyl partials instead of cast metal partials. And it's like, how can you do dentistry like that? It doesn't make sense. But after I listened to the message, I decided that, well, I'm going to try a little bit of this. So I kind of branched into looking at the mercury aspect of it. And what I tell people is, you're not going to be able to do everything that we're going to talk about this weekend, next week. There's no way you can do it. But what I did is I just started changing my procedures a little bit each meeting until I got to the point where I was up to par with everything. Now, you guys, if you want, go out and buy everything tomorrow and get there next week. But it's tough to do. There's a lot of aspects of it. But it's not impossible. I practice in a little town called Yadkinville, North Carolina. How many have heard of Yadkinville? Yeah. Oh, you got where? How do you hear from Yadkinville?
No, I didn't. I was scratching my back.
Oh, well, you guys raised your hand. You heard of Yadkinville, really? Okay, anyway, Yadkinville's a little town, probably 2,700 people or so, outside of Winston-Salem. But when you say, God, this isn't going to work in my town, I'm telling you, if it works in Yadkinville, it'll work anywhere. We draw in people from a lot of different states, a lot of different regions, because they come in wanting biological dentistry. Your name gets out there, and the website's probably the best way to draw people if you're looking for people interested in this kind of dentistry. Radio and other medias are good for aesthetic dentistry, but the people that know about biologic dentistry will know more than you do sometimes when they come in, and they'll come in for the web. And it was a humbling experience for me because these people knew more than I did, and that's you can't know more than I do. I'm the doctor. But it didn't take long to realize and humble yourself that, yeah, these folks have done a lot of research. They know, and they know their bodies. I've had some come in and, they can't have perfume. Fragrances, they get sick. Fluorescent lighting will make them sick. And you're going, whew, this is a weirdo. But when you spend some time talking to these people and listening to them, they've been everywhere trying to get help. And they finally found somebody who listens to them and understands that maybe heavy metals are their problem, because no other physician has figured this out. So when you relate to them like that, suddenly, presenting dentistry and accepting it's not a problem. They've done everything to get these fillings out and have them replaced. I mean, it's like, okay, I want to do it. When can I start? Money's not an issue. I just need to get healthy. So it's a different way of relating to people. So my point being, you got to listen to these kooks and crazies a little bit. They're kind of the Birkenstock group. A lot of them will come in with all natural clothing, and Birkenstock shoes, and they dress differently and they live differently. And trust me, they know if you know what you're talking about. And if you don't do the protocol as we suggest, they'll go, is that a vinyl dam? Instead of a rubber dam, you got to use vinyl. So you can't fool them, and you shouldn't have no reason to fool them. But my point being, you need to follow the protocol and do it right, because they'll know if you don't. So I found the IAOMT. I talked to you about that. And then my evolution was learning nothing about this to now I'm up here lecturing about it, being president, secretary. I'll be losing my job tomorrow. I think we have a change in our bylaws, and the secretary and treasurer are going to become one job. So after about actually 10 years, on the executive council because I was assistant president, vice president. I won't be on the monthly calls. Maybe I will. I don't know. I'll see if I can get in there. But at any rate, getting on here, because I'll speak until lunch if you let me. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. In other words, what Carl Sagan was saying is just because you can't have a direct correlation to something, you can't say A goes to B equals C, doesn't mean it ain't so. So, sometimes you look at this and go, well, I don't see exact correlation. Just think about it. Later on when I'm talking, you'll get a better idea of how toxic mercury is and maybe how unhealthy it can be for you. Also, we got, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change, and that's Wayne Dyer. So again, just sit back, have an open mind, listen to what we're saying. We believe it in our heart, and hopefully you will when you leave. It's not what you don't think, it's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that ain't so. And that's one of those Will Rogers.
Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Is mercury toxic?
Elemental mercury is toxic.
Silver amalgam fillings, does it contain mercury?
It does.
Almost up to 50%?
Yes.
Mercury is a toxic substance.
A lot of us have dental amalgams that contain mercury. Anywhere from 4 to 19 micrograms of mercury per day can leach out of your amalgams into your body.
A single filling delivers micrograms of mercury, which in mercury terms is a lot.
Mercury is vaporizing from the amalgams, and you have 80% absorption through the lungs. This is a fairly dangerous scenario.
When dentists go to dental school, they're taught that mixed dental amalgam is completely inert.
They taught us nothing about protecting the staff from the dangers of mercury vapor.
The amount of mercury vapor that's released from amalgam restorations is so minute.
And so when a dentist goes in to grind out an amalgam filling, he is creating tremendous quantities of mercury particulate.
Their dental drill runs at about 400,000 RPM, and it sends a shower of micron size and submicron size particles everywhere. It's tens of thousands of parts per million.
I've never seen levels of mercury this high. That's pretty much unheard of in any type of work environment.
When a woman is pregnant, we hope that she's never exposed to mercury vapor because we know that it can pass the placenta and cause neurological problems in the unborn baby.
Everyone working around hazardous chemicals and other toxic substances has a right to know of possible dangers and how to protect themselves.
When patients see us dressed like this, there's no way they could believe Mercury-Safe in their mouths.
Kind of scary, isn't it?
If you're exposed to mercury, we start seeing much more serious health effects. These health effects would be
Chronic fatigue, double vision,
Couldn't sleep, depression,
panic attacks, memory loss, a lowered immune system,
loss of vision,
chronic headaches.
It is both an immediate problem in some individuals and a very long-term problem in others.
I started having neurological symptoms.
I didn't feel like a human being.
In the deepest part of myself, I thought I was dying.
People think you're crazy, and you're not crazy. You have mercury poisoning.
They'll evacuate a public building for a broken thermometer, but each one of your amalgam fillings has about the same amount of mercury.
2 schools will be closed tomorrow after a custodian finds a small amount of mercury on the floor of a room at Hickman Mills High School.
Now, how much mercury are we talking about? Not very much. About the amount the size of the eraser on this pencil, but school officials explained to us it would only take the amount of mercury about the size of the sharpened end of this pencil to contaminate the entire building.
A toxin that can do the effect, you have it placed within inches of your brain.
They've never done any safety studies on this product.
Why is it that the ADA will not tell the public that mercury amalgam is harmful?
Frankly, the American Dental Association welcomes
history of it, mercury-containing silver paste back in the 7th century by the Chinese. They figured out they could mix mercury
by the American Dental Association and
containing
dental
copper, I
branch
guess it
of
was,
Food
and
and Drug
silver
Administration.
shavings and create a paste. Now, I don't think they had any application for it, but they realized it was paste and then it set hard. And then 200 years ago, Augustus Trudeau created the first amalgam filling. So, you know, it's interesting. I always look at that and go, would you go to a physician that was using a material that was used 200 years ago? I mean, we're going to put a leech on the side of your head to draw that pus out of there, or we're going to do some bloodletting. I mean, that's techniques they used back then. So we're still using a material that's that old. And this is the interesting thing. The first amalgam war it started about 1833. The Krakow brothers were French, and they came from England. I don't know why they didn't come from France, but they came from England to New York City and set up shop there. And they were like the first to have dental clinic as we know them today. And what they were using was mercury amalgam fillings. That's what they were placing. Back then, you know that techniques were crude. It was either drill a hole in your teeth, probably weren't numbed, or extract the tooth. So this got pretty popular because it was pretty inexpensive. And the other group that were against this, excuse me, was the American Society of Dental Surgeons, and they were using gold. Well, that's a hard market. If you've got someone who compare the price of gold filling to the price of amalgam filling, amalgams are going to win out because generally the people didn't know anything about mercury poisoning back then, but they did know that there was a disease called man as a hatter. It was mercurialism. So what happened is the American Society of Dental Surgeons decided that if you used a mercury filling, you were a quack because the name for mercury was German name is quacksilver. So the name quack actually started from people using mercury fillings, and now the ADA looks at us as quacks because we don't use mercury fillings. But the American Society of Dental Surgeons kind of folded because it got so popular to do the mercury fillings that people just quit and went over to the mercury side. And those groups, the group that were pro-mercury, actually started the ADA back in 1859. So since then, the ADA has promoted mercury fillings. And you see they've got the barbershop. Again, this is Randall stuff. You know, back then when they extracted teeth, the reason the barbershops were so popular is because they're the only ones that had a chair that laid back. So that was convenient to do any kind of dentistry that they might do. And I don't believe in 1850 you really had to have a dental license. And this is just a little reminder, Man of the Hatter, that what they would do, they would take felt, to make felt, they would take wool and they would boil it in mercury chloride. And as they stood over these vats stirring this stuff, obviously the workers were absorbing the mercury vapor and became Man as a Hatter. And that's how we knew the toxicity of mercury. And some of the physicians back then were aware of that. And that was banned in 1941. That was the first amalgam war. Now the second amalgam war, excuse me, started right before the World War II. And these were a couple German or European scientists. And both of these guys, Alfred Stock and Borinsky, experimented on themselves with mercury vapor and with some dogs and animals. And what they would do, and back in, let's say 1830, I'm not sure how efficient or effective the calibration and the equipment was to measure this, but what they would do is they would inhale mercury vapor, and then they would measure their urine and feces to see how much mercury was coming out. They also did it with dogs. And then they both chronicalized the symptoms of mercury poisoning as it progressed to more and more mercury. So I was like, my hat off to them for doing that, but poof, I think I'm a different test subject than me. And then the controversy lasted for a while. These guys were getting their information out, and then World War II happened in Europe, and obviously they had more important things to think about than mercury poisoning as Germany was taking over Europe. So the third amalgam war was started back in the mid-'80s, early '80s. A guy named Olympia Pinto from Brazil. He was here a meeting or two ago, and a very big move in Brazil, thanks to the IAOMT, to ban mercury. And we're working all over the world to do this. And then a guy named Matt Hadson, Swedish neurobiologist, and early explained mercury poisoning from dental amalgam. We have Hal Huggins involved. Anybody heard of Hal Huggins? Yeah, he was a very interesting guy. Went out to his area in Colorado Springs several years ago, took his course. He's passed now. Griff, he had him, and I can't see real well, that lights in my eyes, but our past president, Griff Cole, he had Hal Huggins out to the Austin meeting, which we had shortly before Hal died. And it was a real tribute to him and what he did, because he lost his dental license by doing and saying what I'm talking about right now. And the IAOMT was formed again in 1984. And the controversy continues. I mean, to me, I can't believe it's still going on. It's not a hot a heated debate or anything or a fight going on, but it's interesting to me that there's still controversy about it. And you'll see why. You'll be surprised there's controversy over the next couple of days. All right, so these are just a few dates, as I've already said. You can see in 1926, 31, 1980, 84, 2000, 2013, UNEP, in the United Nations Environmental Program, called for a global phase-out of mercury, including dental mercury. So the UN's working on it. Significant dates in dental amalgam mercury usage in the U.S. Well, the National Dental Institute and the ADA acknowledge mercury might be released from amalgam fillings. Well, we know it is. You can measure it. It's not an if, it's how much comes off. And you'll see a video here in a bit of we call it the smoking tooth video that will show you mercury coming off a 25-year-old mercury filling in an extracted tooth. In '86, the ADA enacted a resolution that says you cannot remove mercury fillings for toxicological reasons. Well, you don't have to. I mean, you put an intraoral camera in somebody's mouth with a mercury filling, you can show them the cracks, you can show them the recurrent decay. It's not a question of, is there a problem there? It's how soon is this tooth going to break? And I tell my folks when they come in with a broken tooth, they said, oh, it broke last night. I was eating mashed potatoes. I said, well, the truth is it was broken probably a year ago. It just came apart last night. So when you put an intraoral camera in there, you can see the damage these fillings do. So if you don't want to get in any trouble, because I'm in trouble with the board again in North Carolina, not for my practicing dentistry, but for my views on mercury. And I had been in the past. I had to go down to Raleigh several years ago because, you know, I was out, my website was speaking things that I'm talking about right now. And they said, oh, you can't do that. I spent $10,000 with an attorney defending me for the right to say mercury filling. They said, no, you're going to say amalgam. I said, how damn if I am. You know, I got free speech. It's a mercury filling. So a couple other things. They made me take a couple of pages off that gave symptoms of mercury poisoning. Okay, I'll give that up. But now they're at me again because I was asked by a publisher in my area to answer some questions. He gave me the questions and I answered them on fluoride and mercury. Mercury, you know, it's interesting. One of the things they're up in arms against, and I got to tell Jim Love's our attorney. He's not in the room right now, but he's done a marvelous job. Haven't got his bill yet, but he's done a great job. One of the controversies was mercury fillings crack teeth. They expand 9 times, 8 times, 10 times, I don't know, more than the tooth does. They said, well, prove that. Well, yeah, you can do it in the literature. So at any rate, just be careful what you say. I mean, you can be all over this, but, you know, when you go to print, website, or, yeah, just kind of, North Carolina's terrible, man. The board is really strict. Joe Palmer, I think you can practice in South Carolina without a license and you're okay. But North Carolina, whew, ain't happening. No, ain't happening. So at any rate, be careful. You can get in trouble. And it's, I mean, I've had a friend of mine lose his license for 90 days because he was doing, was it EAV? Is that it, Griff? Yeah. Which is a very accurate way of telling whether somebody's materials are good for them or not, because it's a muscle test and all that kind of. You can't do muscle testing. Is it accurate? Yeah, it is. But there's no science there. So you can't defend yourself for using that. So be careful. Back to the lesson here. Okay. FDA Center for Devices and Radiation Health officially classified dental amalgam as Class 2. Moderate risk, no proof of safety required. Interesting. Well, that's like marijuana is still a Class 1 drug. I mean, that up there with heroin. That's pretty interesting, too. Well, haven't our opinions changed about that? Of course, my opinion's always been different about that, but I grew up in the 60s. EPA is currently proposing standards for discharge of dental pollutants into publicly owned wastewater. About time. I mean, I've had a mercury separator in my basement for 18 years, I guess. So, you know, what you're going to learn is 40 to 60% of the mercury in our streams and rivers are coming from our offices. So when you suck that mercury filling out of that person's mouth, it goes right down into the not septic system probably, but into the sewer system. And when they do that drainage and all that big tank that the sewer plant does is get sediment out. And the rest of that effluent, the dried stuff that they go spread on fields, it's got everything in it. If you're still developing film, it's got all those chemicals in it. It's got every bit of mercury comes out of your office. So with a mercury separator, and I'm getting ahead of myself, you can separate about 99% of the mercury coming out of your office, which is again, an environmental impact. All right, just some basic chemistry. Mercury is a heavy metal, atomic weight at 80. It's metal. It's the only metal liquid at room temperature. It's gas. It's colorless, odorless, tasteless. Here comes my. What am I doing? Oh, is it off over here? Yeah. Oh, okay. I don't know how I did that. I tell you, I mess these things up every time I grab them. I've done pretty good though. It's the first time I've messed it up. Yeah. All right, we'll come back. I'll need you. All right. It's obviously a gas. It's colorless, odorless, tasteless. Vaporizes at about 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And for every 50 degrees, the evaporation or doubles. So the vaporization doubles. So, you know, if it starts vaporizing at 10, consider our bodies at about 100. So it's vaporizing twice as fast. And very reactive. It oxidizes very easy. It's real quick to lend electrons. And just some ionophore mercury, elemental mercury, which is coming off the fillings. It doesn't have a charge. Elemental mercury as a vapor is absorbed into your lungs, and it does pass through cell membranes into the mitochondria because it doesn't have a charge. If something's got a charge, it can't pass through that. It passes the blood-brain barrier, 80% uptake, so that's a bad actor. Mercurius lost 1 electron, and then you got mercuric, which has lost 2 electrons. Inorganic mercury salt formed by oxidation of mercury, poor uptake in the intestines, poor mobility. So, you know, this reminds me, of course, we always have a rubber dam and vacuum under it and over it and everything else. But, you know, if you get a little chunk of mercury or filling that somebody swallows, that's not really a big issue because that thing's going to pass through and not be a big problem. So I'm not saying it's insignificant, but what we're concerned about is the mercury vapor that's coming off the fillings when we remove them. And we're grinding on these things. And as we showed in that movie, I was involved with Joe Palmer and Matt to do a little bit of that. And it was scary. Chemical forms of mercury. You got methyl mercury, and that's just mercury that's picked up a thiol group or a sulfur group. And it starts by the bacteria in your mouth and the bacteria in your gut. It becomes the methyl mercury quite easily. 95% uptake in the intestines, good mobility, and crosses the blood-brain barrier. And then finally, ethyl mercury, thimerosal, and that is a preservative in vaccines, a synthetic form, which is antimicrobial, is why they put it in there, so it kills the bacteria in the vaccine. And just as a side note here, you know, and it does cross the blood-brain barrier, is that in 1980 they started adding thimerosal, I call it thimerosal, to the vaccines. And a baby gets 22 vaccines by the time it's 2 years old. And the thimerosal was in these vaccines. Back in 1980, there were autistic children, which are primarily male. There was 1 in 500,000. Today it's 1 in 160 and falling. So we can't say cause and effect. That's what it was, the thimerosal. But it's kind of coincidental that you start making children be injected with mercury, and that autistic rate climbs so incredibly high. Could be a combination of environmental factors with mercury, could be with fluoride, could be with lead, who knows? But you know, the AMA came out and said there's no correlation, but sure is strange to me. But what is methylation? Unique factor related to mercury exposure and individual response. Bacteria in the soil and water can convert mercury from the environment into methyl mercury, which you have pregnant with. You know, the fish idea is one aspect. I'll talk about it later. But this is one reason why you should not remove a mercury filling from a pregnant lady or one who's nursing, because the mercury, with all your precautions, is going to be absorbed to some degree. And once it's absorbed, it does go into the fetus, and it does go into the breast milk. So there's going to have to be some crazy reason for me to have to remove a mercury filling on either a pregnant or a lactating lady. Documented the ability of mercury in the human system to transform into methyl mercury. I mean, it just happens. It happens in the ground. It happens in the environment. Why is methylation? Why the issue is essential to? Because humans are exposed to inorganic mercury from dental amalgams, food and industrial pollution, coal burning. I mean, more and more we have mercury in our environment with other thousands and thousands of chemicals. It's amazing how many different chemicals are out there that weren't there 50 years ago that are in our environment. You know, you're looking at bisphenol A, you know, and now the receipts you get from the grocery store has got bisphenol A, which acts as an estrogen. It's not estrogen, but it acts like that. So I guess that's one of the reasons testosterone and all these erectile dysfunction drugs, maybe they're so popular because we're inundated with estrogen mimicking drugs. Men are, and it's also in some of the composites. Joe will talk about that a little bit later, but a lot of these composites have bisphenol A in them, and you're removing them, so you're getting the vapor, and the patient's also absorbing it. That's just my theory. Did that change? Okay, role of selenium, very interesting. Has the strongest affinity for mercury. The next would be covalent bonds with thiol groups or sulfur groups. If mercury binds to selenium before it enters the body, it will be less toxic. If mercury binds to selenium after it enters the body, it's going to be difficult to remove because you have to have a chelating agent that binds mercury more strongly than selenium would. Selenium is an antioxidant, very, very good antioxidant. It binds with oxygen and protects us against free radical damage. That's good. Fish are high in selenium. They just naturally are. And what happens is in the fish body, the mercury binds with selenium, so the fish aren't dying of mercury poisoning because it's bound to the selenium. So when you eat fish, by and large, since it's bound to the mercury the selenium is, it's not going to be as toxic for you and I as the mercury vapor would be. And I'll show you some of that later. Like I said, mercury fish already reacted with the proteins. The mercury bound to selenium is not as toxic as an equal amount of pure mercury. So I'm not saying go out and eat tuna every night, but it's not the problem. I tend to avoid high mercury fish just because I live in a mercury environment and my past history, as I've explained. But I don't avoid fish. But you just want to get a fish that's not as high on the food chain. You know, every fish eats another fish and another fish. And when you get to the tunas and the mackerels and the big guys, they've eaten everything down the line and their mercury accumulation is quite high. Mercury's affinity, okay, forms covalent bonds with sulfur. More than 99% of our enzyme contains sulfur groups that has a strong affinity to mercury. And mercury would be bound to sulfur groups and disrupts the function of the enzyme. In other words, when you have an enzyme measured by blood test, it's still there. It's at 60% or whatever it's supposed to be. But that doesn't tell you it doesn't work because it's got mercury hanging off it and the key no longer fits in the keyhole. So that enzyme does not work, although it's there. And a lot of these enzymes are for detoxification. So if you bind up that enzyme that's used for detox, it's no longer detoxing you. So think of it that way too. And mercury has an affinity for methionine, cysteine, cysteine, and they're all enzymes and they're all sulfur groups. Okay, relative toxicity of heavy metal, Mercury is on the top of the list. You wouldn't guess that, would you? It's always arsenic. I don't know if you guys remember Blanche Taylor Moore in North Carolina. She killed about 3 of her husbands with arsenic over the years. That's been about 20 years ago. They finally put her away. They finally figured out what was going on, but you always think of arsenic as the worst, but mercury's up there. Cadmium is a bad actor. When people get blood tests and come back from their doctors for heavy metal testing, cadmium is always on there. That's a lot of cigarette smoke. If you're a secondhand smoker, in other words, if you got somebody in the family that smokes, you might be heavy in cadmium too. Arsenic, they're on the list. I don't think we generally run into arsenic unless you try to. Thallium and lead. Look how low lead is. My dad used to have a gas station when I was a kid, Texaco, and I used to work in a gas station cleaning parts with gas and pumping gas and breathing gas. And when they first took lead out of the gas, I was like, my God, we can't believe they did that. I worked my way through dental school and undergraduate painting houses. I'd go through school Monday through Thursday, then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday I'd paint. Did that for 9 years, thinking I was a wife and a daughter, so I had to do something. And when they took lead out of paint, it was like dentists having to wear gloves. Remember those days? Some of us older guys will remember that you could not possibly do dentistry with gloves on. Just can't happen. Now you couldn't possibly do dentistry without a glove on. So when they took lead out of gas and paint, we were all going, oh my God, what's going to happen? It's the end of the world. Yeah, that's fine. Did I do something again, Joe? Okay. Well, I'm moving over here on the left, and my slide's not changing. I want you to stay up here with me. This is my slide, man.
That's where you are. You going to
Just click, yeah.
That's where you're going.
Yeah, but this is not advancing.
Who's that? Who's this?
Okay.
There's nothing.
All right, this
there's
is
nothing hooked up for that to here.
okay.
Dave put something on.
Well, here.
Who's that?
Okay. All right. We'll see if this. All right. This is just going back with a Newsweek article many years ago. I don't see the date on there, but well, there Clarence Thomas was being trying to be confirmed, so it's been a while. Just you know, the lead and the controversy we were going through. Now I have to use it. I'm gonna have to use this button. Okay. That's the next slide.
So Bill and I were asked to do this about 9 years ago, something like that. I asked Bill to do it, and I was sitting by him. I said, "Bill, how are you going to do that?" He said, "What do you mean? You ain't on a damn computer." He didn't.
Hey, you'll be happy to know I got a new car, and now I'm Bluetoothing.
No,
that's amazing. You know, I can't tell you how many people I've hung up on because I couldn't figure out what button to push, but I finally got it.
Have you done this?
No. Back. Okay, I'm right there. So what button you that down one? Okay.
Oh, you got to touch.
Cool.
Don't touch it.
Yep. All right. And yesterday I figured out how to send a text on my phone. I was so I'm proud of myself. I really am. But don't forget I'm old, man. That stuff. Grandkids figure that stuff out. Heavy metal synergy. What happens when you combine the lethal dose of mercury and the lethal dose of lead? It becomes 100 times more toxic. Synergy. And that's what I'm wondering is something, we talk about autism, maybe that's what's going on with these kids. Maybe it's mercury and fluoride and lead, and who knows what other pollutants are out there that are causing this, but it's a problem. Everybody knows somebody that's got an autistic child today. When I was a kid, never heard of it. You know, just never heard, didn't hear Alzheimer's disease. I mean, it wasn't something that was out there. Maybe it was, and we didn't know about it. This slide's got a lot on it. But what it's basically saying is, exposure to other medical chemicals can also influence a person's response to mercury. Exactly what I'm talking about with synergy. So with combining heavy metals, for instance, if you've got fluoride, you've got an increased amount of lead. If you've got these heavy metals in your body, the mitochondria are not going to be happy. You're not going to be producing the energy that you would if you weren't having these heavy metals. But the point being is that they are synergistic. They work together to destroy mitochondria and your energy, or for that matter, the cell. This Tom McGuire, he'll probably be here at our exhibit hall. Good guy, go talk to him. Mercury is the most poisonous, non-radioactive, naturally occurring substance on the planet. Okay, non-radioactive plutonium obviously would be worse, but mercury is the most naturally occurring material. Yeah, there is no safe or harmless level of mercury. Just one atom of mercury is harmful to the body. Amalgam fillings continue to release poisonous mercury vapor the entire time they're in the mouth. In fact, when they lose enough of their mercury, that's when they fall apart. They crack and fall out. And then they, of course, get another mercury filling. Any form of stimulation that heats the amalgam filling will increase the release of mercury vapor. Now that means bruxing, hot coffee, that means a toothbrush, that means chewing gum. Anything that increases the surface of that mercury filling increases the vaporization. Mercury filling is the single greatest source of mercury exposure. I'll show you later. That's from the World Health Organization saying that. Again, mercury fillings are the greatest source. It's not our food, it's not our air, it's not our water. It is mercury fillings. The first exposure of mercury from mercury fillings can occur at the moment of conception. Remember, this crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it goes all through the body until it's ionized. Mercury passes through the placenta to the fetus and through breast milk to the nursing mom. We mentioned that. Chronic mercury poisoning can directly and indirectly contribute to increase the risk of severity of every known disease and health issue. Okay, this is always an interesting chart. It kind of puts it in perspective of when we're talking about an atom of mercury. Now, 1 ounce, if you remember your chemistry or physics or whatever, math, I guess, is 28 grams. Okay, that's pretty simple. 1 gram is 1,000 milligrams. 1 milligram is 1,000 micrograms. Atoms of mercury in a microgram, the number of atoms in a microgram of mercury is 4 trillion. So even if you've got 1 microgram of mercury, that means 4 trillion atoms, which is a lot of enzymes to screw up. So it's not a question of having to drink this stuff. It's a question of having any exposure to it. And, you know, as dentists, here we are sitting, assistants, hygienists, very heavy mercury environment. I mean, it's interesting, OSHA is, we're the only industry they don't regulate. And when I have my OSHA not inspector, but my OSHA lady that comes in every year and, you know, gets to make sure we get all the stuff right. I said, when are you guys going to talk about mercury? They're going to be like, why? Why would we do that? I said, well, you're the only OSHA people out there that don't. So interesting why that is. I don't know. I guess the ADA, I'm guessing, I don't want to keep blaming the ADA, but some reason that dentistry is not being regulated. And what that means is assistants and the hygienists and the dentists, for that matter, are being exposed to mercury unnecessarily. You couldn't do that in a fluorescent light bulb factory. I mean, they are all over you for mercury exposure. This is the electromicrogram of a mercury filling. And what you can see, maybe my pointer will work. Okay, these little globulets, these little round balls here, that is mercury, okay? And what happens is it gets to the top of the filling. You can't see it because we've got a label up here now, but let's just assume this is the top of the filling right here, the occlusal surface. As this thing wears down, you can see now these little undissolved, unamalgamated mercury globules evaporate. That's how this happens. So this is a real microgram of a mercury filling, and that's where the vaporization is coming from. Is the fact that when it wears down, this is now exposed to the environment. Okay, amalgam fillings are often referred to as silver fillings. I've covered that, but they're composed 50% mercury, and then there's a combination of silver, copper, tin, and zinc in there. Copper to control, was it creep, I think it was? Was that the word we used to use? Creating a mixing process referred to as titration. How many still you got? I don't even have a titurator. Wouldn't know what to do with one. And that's a major reason biological dentistry is needed, and we've all seen, I apologize, there are pictures of teeth, so that may be all you get to see this week. And when combining any component, the compound should be named based on the largest ingredient. That's called the FDA. So when you get cornflakes, probably a major ingredient in that box, well, maybe it's sugar first, but should be corn, you know? And that's what we usually look at when we look at the ingredients on the side of the box. The major ingredient is the number 1. So by this, it tells me they ought to be called mercury fillings and not amalgams or silver fillings, because silver is not the predominant ingredient in the filling. It's a mercury filling, and that's why you'll hear us say mercury filling. Very rarely you're going to hear amalgam, or very rarely silver. They're mercury. This is I think this came out of dispersaloid box. When I came out of school, that's what we were using, dispersaloid IU, and there's a high copper amalgam. But this is in their contradicted box with on their label is that you can't use it in expectant mothers. We covered that. Children 6 and under. Proximal or occlusal contact is dissimilar metals. I see that all the time. I guess you guys do too. You have a mercury filling up against a gold crown or a stainless steel crown, which is even worse because then you got a lot of nickel. Patients with severe renal deficiency, patients with known allergies. Who ever tests anybody for mercury allergy? I haven't. For retrograde or endodontic fillings, that's something that's really a bad actor. I don't see that much anymore. We don't do retrograde amalgam fillings, but if I have a problem with an endo tooth, it comes out. Boy, implants have gotten so good now, why fool with it? Get it out of there. True with most root canals anyway. Or as a filling under cast crown. I mean, I'm all the time taking off old crowns and there's mercury filling under them. I mean, we were taught back in the 70s not to do that. Of course, galvanism back then is the reason. But the more current you have, the more mercury release. And don't forget now, under that crown, just because there's a mercury filling, okay, you could say, well, how's the mercury going to get out underneath that crown? Well, maybe it doesn't. It's absorbed by the blood flow to the tooth. You know, that's where the mercury issue would be. Okay, we used to call these MSDS sheets. Now they're SDS sheets, and you all got a binder somewhere in the office if you can find it. Okay, so the OSHA requires this to protect our workers, supply them with the most crucial facts about the hazardous materials in the job site, the physical properties of the material, proper storage and handling, known health risks, and essential emergency procedures. A manufacturer of amalgam fillings must create these information sheets along with probably every product we use in the office. Toxicological information, chronic health effects. Well, you know, what you're going to find, and this is what I had to remove from my website years ago, is that, you know, inhalation of mercury, mercurialism, is blamed for a lot of things. Whether it's all true or not, I don't know, but you can go through this list. I don't need to read them all out to you, but I mean, tremors, inflammation of the mouth, blue lines on the gum, that must be an amalgam tattoo. You know, I was taught, maybe you guys weren't, but amalgam tattoo is from removing the amalgam from a filling, and because the drill, handpiece, spins at 400,000 RPMs, this tornado of mercury filling material gets injected into the gum tissue. Huh. Okay, yeah, that sounds right. Well, the truth is, it's galvanic reaction that's doing that. If you've got amalgam tattoo here, you probably have mercury filling under the crown number 30, because galvanism is doing that. So it's not a spinning of the mercury tornado or amalgam tornado. All right, weight loss, exposure, any aggravated kidney disorders, may cause blood, kidney, liver, all kinds of things. And whether they're all true, I don't know. But there's a host of them. You'll see this more as I go on. Okay, the SDS sheets from Kerr for their Titan, adverse symptoms may include the following, which is basically the same thing as you'll find the SDS sheet on mercury. And there's very little difference between their Titan product or the SDS on mercury. So you got fetal death, skeletal malformation, saliva, metallic taste, irritate, respiratory tract infections, coughing, wheezing, breathing difficulties, headache, fever, nausea, vomit, diarrhea, abdominal cramps, and pain, weakness. I mean, that's I guess that's why dentists are a lot of times very unhealthy. I'll talk about that a little bit later in a study done at Yale. SDS expert number 3, Henry Schein DDS. I guess that's their product, Stratosphere. I'm a Patterson person, so I don't know what mercuries they've got out there. Are they all mercury amalgam brands? Do you guys know? Okay, I thought that. Very toxic by inhalation. Toxic, may cause harm to the unborn child. Toxic, dangerous, serious damage to health by prolonged exposure through inhalation, which is dentists, assistants, and hygienists. Must be disposed of together with household garbage. Cannot be. You know, that's an interesting thing. You've probably heard before that when it's mercury fillings are fine when you put them in the mouth, but some reason when they stay in the mouth for any length of time, when you remove them, it's toxic waste. Then you have to do something with it environmentally. You can't just dump this stuff down the drain. You've got to have somebody come and collect it, and then whatever they do with it, I don't know. Probably dump it down the drain. But I don't know why that stuff changes so radically when it's in the mouth, but it sure must do that. And this, I'm not talking about this. This is part of the amalgam separators that we use, and they're not expensive. They're not hard to hook up. So if nothing else you do this weekend, get an amalgam separator. Let's keep it out of our streams and rivers. And here's mercury, MSDS sheet, which is SDS sheet, chronic long-term exposure. You know, I hate to be redundant on this. I'm just trying to make a point that the SDS sheet from amalgam fillings, mercury fillings, and mercury, they're no different. They're the same. Tremor, salivate, inflammation of the mouth, loosening the teeth, blue lines. Again, that's the tattoos and weight loss, anorexia, mental depression, insomnia, inability. Good grief. Goes on and on and on. You know, you always hear that dentists have the highest rate of suicide, divorce, and alcoholism. You know, we always thought it was because of the stress of the job. I don't know. It is pretty stressful, can be. I find it a lot less stressful now when I'm practicing the way I do because I'm working on people who want me to work on them. You know, they're like, I'm glad I'm here kind of thing. You don't get to have that very often. And I also call these people, you know, a lot of them, the kooks and crazies that I was talking about earlier, the Birkenstock, they bring me cookies and they give me hugs. And it's like, wow, this is worth doing. And I'm also improving their health. And I can look at my assistants and see, you know, they know I'm doing something that's protecting them too. And you think about that, my staff's been with me since, good grief, I think I started practicing. I've had 2 hygienists retire. I got 2 new ones now. I've had assistants, one for 36, one for 32 years. And my front desk has been there for about 30, I guess, something like that. But, you know, the longevity is not because I'm such a good boss, although I think that's the major reason. I think it's my personality really that keeps them there. It's because where are they going to go? Where are they going to go and contaminate themselves with another dental office? It ain't going to happen. So, you know, it really does help for staff retention. And the staff knows they're being protected from these mercury vapor. I mean, that's important to them. Once they learn what's going on, they're not going to go someplace else and work in a mercury environment. I don't want them to. High copper amalgam filling release roughly 300 micrograms initially after placement and almost 800 milligrams a week later. That's the thing about these high copper amalgam fillings and the material itself is that they release a lot of mercury. And when you go back to before the copper, you can see that the placement 102 micrograms and 160 a week later. So the addition of copper was good from a material sense, but it rapidly increases the release of mercury in these fillings. In 1975, the high levels of copper were added to amalgam. That's about when I was graduated in 79. That's all we used was, what did I say, Titan, was it? I don't know, one of those. And then at 76, we noticed an increase in Lou-Gehrig's. And by 76, you had incidence of multiple sclerosis. Now, again, whether that's cause and effect, I don't know. But again, along with all autistic children, it's kind of coincidental that these high copper amalgams come out and we suddenly have an increase in these 2 particular neurological diseases, neuromuscular diseases. High copper amalgam, which are still used today, removes much greater amounts of mercury. And we've all had galvanism in school. And you can see the classic picture here with, this is one of Joe's pictures here of his work. You got a gold against the mercury there. So we know that that's going to increase the output of the mercury out of that filling. Is electric current produced by chemical action in the mouth. And I was taught this in school back in, you know, in the mid-70s. So this is not anything new. Currents in the oral cavity, the brain operates on nanoamps, very, very low amperage. Mercury fillings produce 1,000 times more amperage than amperage required by the brain. Now, many of you aren't old enough probably to remember watching Johnny Carson at night, or even remember Lucille Ball for that matter. But Lucille Ball came on Johnny Carson one night, and she was, as they always do, she's a comedian, he's a comedian, they're going on, and she says she hears radio stations in her head. Of course, I don't know what Johnny said about that, but if you all know who he was, he'd come up with something pretty funny, like the Arnold Palmer joke he came up with. Maybe some of you remember that. But at any rate, of course, everybody was laughing. But what she was talking about, there's Dr. Phil. I've scared them all about your afternoon session. Yeah, they'll all be out at the brewery. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But no, she heard radio. I mean, because we're guessing because of the dissimilar metals in her mouth creates an antenna. And I've had patients come in and say that. Have you ever eaten a piece of gum like, and this foil was still on a piece of Wrigley, you know? Dude, you get that thing. I don't have any mercury fillings, but I did years ago. That's galvanic shock. And this is Skinner and Phillips. Ralph Phillips was my dental materials lecturer back in school. Oh my God, what a brilliant guy, but what a slow, boring speaker he was. Good grief. I can remember after lunch, we all just crashed. Let me go back through here again. Sorry about that. Skinner Phillips, insertion of mercury restoration directly in contact with the gold crown is contradicted, and that was back, I wouldn't be surprised, well, that's 64. So that's quite a ways we've known not to do this. I still see it. Mercury in tooth roots and jaw bones, 4-fold increase in the amount of mercury per gram of tissue that's injected into the bone. So again, I don't do no temptations or retrograde fills, but I remember years ago that every one of them came back with a mercury filling in the tip of that tooth. And then they went to, I think, or something else, but not a good thing.
Here's the potato clock. It's a science project toy that is meant to show the power of combining metals to create electricity. We'll use it today to show the power of combining metals in a person's mouth to create a potato clock in your head. Here are 2 potatoes, each with a zinc and a copper strip embedded in them. It takes 2 cells of zinc and copper to run this little digital clock. When you hook them all up, the potato clock starts to run. Got it? Here's a variety of dental metals that are embedded in a potato, ready to go. This one is a pure titanium implant. This one is a titanium alloy implant. Here is a lump of amalgam. This one is the remnant of a Maryland bridge, a nickel chromium alloy. Here is the remnant of a crown, porcelain fused to mystery metal. Here is an ingot of high gold content, crown and bridge gold. And here is a bridge of porcelain fused to some kind of yellow crown and bridge gold. Here is one copper and zinc cell, and here is another potato with the variety of dental metals that we just described embedded into it. Let's see what happens when we hook them up. Here is a pure titanium implant, and here is some gold. We get a potato clock. Yes, we are. Here's another gold alloy, and it is lighting up. A mystery gold alloy, and there we go, we get the contact. Here is a titanium alloy implant versus yellow gold, and that lights up the potato clock. Here's some crown and bridge gold. Here's a white gold alloy. And here's some amalgam. And you'll notice that the 2 electronegative metals do not light up the potato clock. Here is a remnant of a Maryland bridge, a nickel chromium alloy. And that lights up the potato clock. And gold. And the white gold. There we go. What about amalgam? Here is a lump of amalgam. What does that do with a pure gold alloy? It's the potato clock. Here, crown and bridge gold, a white gold alloy. What about titanium alloy versus amalgam? No. 2 electronegative metals. We dentists pick metals for people's dental restorations on the basis of their mechanical properties and their durability, but we rarely take into account the electrical properties of the metals. This little demonstration shows how by randomly selecting metals for people's dental restorations, it's the equivalent of creating a potato clock in their heads.
That was Steve Coral. He was a member of our academy for years. He's passed, and we certainly miss him. He was a great guy, brilliant guy. He's past president. All right, the first mercury concentration measured after removal of the amalgams was higher than the baseline for several subjects. What they did here is they took some dentists and they put some mercury fillings in them, and then they measured the values to baseline below the measurement. The increase was attributed to exposure to the subject of additional mercury during grinding of the amalgam. So they removed them. Sorry, I said placed them. They removed amalgams, and this is just a study showing that they had higher mercury levels once the grinding took place, or the removal. Now this is an interesting chart. I wish I could put these all together so you could really see the comparison. If you'll just follow this one this big graft here. That's just follow that one. These other ones were also done, and you can see these were done quite a while ago, 84, 85, 79. And the differences probably were some of the patients had more mercury fillings. It could have been the calibration equipment they used, but what I want you to notice is just unstimulated. That means you got mercury fillings. You're not grinding. You're not chewing. You're not drinking coffee. You're just sitting there in a chair. And when they're measuring the mercury vapor coming off, and that, just 1.76 is the number I want you to remember. So this is unstimulated. And then we go to stimulated. That means you've been chewing, okay, chewing some gum or what have you for a period of time. And we went from 1.76 to 13.1. That's quite a difference in mercury release just from chewing, and that happens every time you chew. Now the numbers are relative, not like it's 13.1 every time you chew. How many mercury fillings do you have? What are you chewing? What are you eating? Is it hot coffee? I mean, it's going to vary. Okay, this is unstimulated per day. This is, again, you're not doing anything, you're just sitting there. But if you measure this for an hour, and then you can extrapolate 24 hours, then you've got 30.4. And then when you go on to the next one, stimulated, assuming you're grinding your teeth for a day, which would probably be, some people I think do that. This is from, sorry, it's 15 minutes. Stimulated is 226. They chewed for 15 minutes. So it's so if you look at that unstimulated 30.4 to 226, obviously with mercury fillings you're absorbing a lot of mercury and or exhaling it. You got to think maybe, okay, I'm inhaling it, it's in my body, but if you've got mercury fillings, it's also being released when you exhale. You're not absorbing all of it. 80% is what you're absorbing. So your friends and family, or colleagues, whoever's in the room with you, it's helping absorb some of your mercury vapor, kind of like secondhand smoke, I guess. It affects whoever you're around. This is a chart, interesting. You can see on the very far left here, we're just sitting there in a chair, and then these patients are asked to chew for 30 minutes. Obviously, they have mercury fillings. Again, it doesn't say how many they had, but after a period of 30 minutes, they're asked to stop chewing. Now, you can see the chart peaks there, so mercury vapor is increasing, coming off. And after you stop chewing, for an hour longer, it's only come down half as much. So the stimulation continues after you stop chewing. Articles of interest. It binds to guanosine triphosphate. Guanosine triphosphate is the part of the tubulin that the axons run through in the nervous system. It's kind of like a straw that allows a nerve fiber to be insulated. It breaks down the guanosine triphosphate. Fillings, a source of mercury exposure revealed by whole body. I'm going to show you whole body scans here in a minute by Vinnie Murray at the University of Calgary, and it was several years ago. And then whole body imaging of a monkey, and I'll tell you why in a minute. All right, first off, we've got the Vinnie Murray study, and this was done many years ago. But what he did, he took a sheep and they made radioactive mercury. Now, radioactive mercury does not exist in nature. You got to make it. So what you're seeing here is a full body scan of a sheep that had mercury fillings placed in the mouth 29 days before. The crowns of the teeth were removed, so all that's left is the roots, so there's no mercury fillings in the mouth. But as you can see, the stomach, you can see many. This is the stomach, and then you've got what should be these are the kidneys up here, I think. And then the other is the liver, which is right in here. But the point being that after 29 days, you can see where this mercury migrated to. The stomach, liver, and kidneys, and still in the jaw. I'm surprised there wasn't some in the brain because it really accumulates in the pituitary gland in the brain. Well, this wasn't, except again, then they took another, you can see the same thing happening here. But that wasn't acceptable to the dental folks in the world. I guess maybe the ADA, I'm not sure who objected to the study at the time. Because what they were saying is, well, sheep don't chew like people, therefore this, you can't compare it. Well, I don't know about that. So they did it on a monkey. Monkeys are pretty similar to us. They chew kind of the same way. And so they did it on a monkey, and you can see the results were the same. Radioactive mercury, you can detect it in the body, and you can see that it's pretty much scanned throughout the body. This is interesting. Research has shown the increased number of maternal mercury fillings, in other words, mom has got mercury fillings in her mouth, increased levels of mercury in the fetus. Remember, a mercury vapor crosses the blood-brain barrier, so it's going to accumulate in the fetus, it's going to accumulate in the brain. Increased number of maternal mercury fillings, again, increased breast milk mercury. So if you got mercury fillings, your fetus, your baby is going to have mercury fillings, and you're going to be feeding them mercury if you breastfeed. I'm not suggesting you don't breastfeed, but it's just a correlation there. Mercury toxicity. Between 8 and 10% of American women have mercury levels that would render any child they give birth to neurological disorders. 8 and 10%. That's a lot. So again, there you go back to autism. Based on this prevalence for overall U.S. population of women at reproductive age, the number of U.S. births each year is estimated to be 300,000 newborns each year may have increased risk of learning disabilities associated with exposure, and that's the CDC, Centers for Disease Control. Now, understand too that what this says to me is the population that's going to get mercury fillings by and large are the poor, because when many of our children had dentistry done, we probably put a composite in because they didn't have mercury fillings to start with. I mean, I hate to think anybody would put a mercury filling in a child today, but we still see it with a pedodontist. But primarily the poor are going to get mercury fillings. They're not going to get composites. So this is affecting an already disinfected group of people. So that's sad to see that, but that's the case. And this is there are a couple studies done, one in New England years ago, and one in Portugal, in orphanages. And what they did, and what the purpose of this is to show you, and I'll explain in a minute, that if you figure out what results you want, you can design a study to get you there. So I think what they set out to do was show that mercury is not a problem with children. But what they did on these studies, they came out and said the porphyrin was not a problem, and the kids weren't affected. And in a general sense, that was the truth. And it wasn't the truth, it's what they were reporting. But later they came back with the same researchers and other researchers to look and see if in fact this is true. And when they looked at it again, they noticed that yes, these kids are being affected by the mercury in these teeth. So, you know, again, like I said, it's you can have a study designed any way you want it. It depends on who's paying for it. You know, I read something the other day where California just passed a law that says you cannot tax groceries until like 2033. There will be no tax on groceries because we're concerned about the poor people. Well, you know who funded that legislation is the soda industry, because they were trying to get away from sugar tax. So again, they funded it, so now there's no tax on soda in the grocery stores. Now, I'm not a big advocate of taxing things. I think people ought to make their own decisions. I'm a minimal government kind of guy. But it's interesting that you got to find out who funded it before you can really believe the research. And that's not research, that was just legislation. And again, I think that there really is no place for, that was, this guy's a pediatric neurologist. Okay, WHO in 1991, dental amalgam is the greatest source of mercury burden in non-occupationally exposed people. Now, if you go to a mercury mine, a Cinnabar, or you go to a fluorescent light factory or something like that, you're probably going to have people exposed to mercury outside of the mercury fillings. But in our society, it's the number one reason that people have mercury in their body. And it's between 3 and 17 micrograms, with 10 micrograms being the average of exposure. 10. Health Canada reported that that would be the equivalent of 8 surfaces of amalgam fillings. So 8, you got what, 4 DOs, and you've got the maximum daily mercury intake you could possibly from the EPA. That's not many mercury fillings. I got people with tons of them. But again, I've got people that got mercury fillings in their mouth and they don't have a problem in the world. I mean, it's like people who smoke and they die of a car accident in '94. You know, there's some people who are susceptible and some aren't as susceptible. But again, this is what I was saying earlier. This is the pie chart, but you can see that this is mercury in the mouth. Okay, and the blue section is fish and seafood, not insignificant, but a lot less than mercury fillings are giving you. And then there's other foods and air and water. So Okay, this is from Europe. From the diet alone does not exceed the tolerable weekly intake. Inhaled mercury vapor from dental amalgams, which also absorb the connected inorganic mercury. So again, what the European Union is saying is that the weekly allotment is exceeded by mercury fillings, not by what you're eating. Now this is a study, or excuse me, a graph, and what this red line indicates is the EPA's limit for how much mercury exposure you can have per day. Not saying it's healthy to have that much, but they're saying over there it's getting worse and worse. But you can see this is estimated exposure in adults with dental mercury fillings. So there's only two studies, the top one and the one down there towards the bottom, that don't go over the EPA's limit. And that could have been because they didn't have very many mercury fillings, or they didn't stimulate them or something, I'm not sure. But every one of those other studies, everybody's off the chart, according to the EPA. Why Mercury-Free, Mercury-Safe, and Biological Dentistry? There's no threshold below which some adverse effects do not occur. There's going to be an adverse effect. You just might not know it yet, but enough mercury and enough time, you will. May cause harmful effects to the nervous, digestive. We covered that. Again, these are all the same things that the SDS sheets covered, and they all point to the same thing. Richardson assessment, updating exposure, re-examining references. Okay, it was determined that some 67 million Americans would exceed the mercury dose associated with the reference dose of 0.3 micrograms per cubic meter, and that is that 67 million Americans are over what the EPA would say is allowable mercury in the body. So not a good thing. This is by Paranundi. He's a professor at Ohio State University. He's been lecturing here several times. And this is interesting to me because Tom Levy is also going to be here. Listen to Tom Levy. He's a cardiologist. He's great. Years ago, I don't know what his topic's going to be, Griff, do you know this time? But years ago, he lectured on isolated scurvy, it was called. And it was from a lack of vitamin C. And his theory, being a cardiologist, is that plaque formation is associated with a lack of vitamin C, and what your arteries do in individual spots develop a little scurvy, a blemish, you might call it. And then what happens, cholesterol comes in to repair that and repair it and repair it. So his theory years ago was vitamin C is doing that, lack of vitamin C. And here we got Paranundi saying that mercury vapor could be doing that, because what it does, it attaches the lipids and endothelium of the blood vessels and altering the lipid signaling mediators, which call in prostaglandins, call in the cholesterol to repair the damage to the epithelial lining of that artery. So vitamin C, mercury, or lack of vitamin C. Mercury causes cytotoxicity in the vascular epithelium, and mercury causes mitochondrial damage. We know that. So, and that means that's where your energy comes from. That's where the ATP is made. All right, this is going to be a good slide coming up. Mercury, and it'll show you how it demyelinizes the nerve fibers and leads to diseases such as MS, Lou Gehrig's, and many illnesses and depressions. This is really cool.
How mercury causes brain neuron degeneration. Mercury has long been known to be a potent neurotoxic substance, whether it is inhaled or consumed in the diet as a food contaminant. Over the past 15 years, medical research laboratories have established that dental amalgam tooth fillings are a major contributor to mercury body burden. In 1997, a team of research scientists demonstrated that mercury vapor inhalation by animals produced a molecular lesion in brain protein metabolism, which was similar to a lesion seen in 80% of Alzheimer's diseased brains. Recently completed experiments by scientists at the University of Calgary's Faculty of Medicine now reveal, with direct visual evidence from brain neuron tissue cultures, how mercury ions actually alter the cell membrane structure of developing neurons. To better understand mercury's effect on the brain, let us first illustrate what brain neurons look like and how they grow. In this animation, we see 3 brain neurons growing in a tissue culture, each with a central cell body and numerous neurite processes. At the end of each neurite is a growth cone where structural proteins are assembled to form the cell membrane. Two principal proteins involved in growth cone function are actin, which is responsible for the pulsating motion seen here, and tubulin, a major structural component of the neurite membrane. During normal cell growth, tubulin molecules link together end to end to form microtubules, which surround neurofibrils, another structural protein component of the neuronal axon. Shown here is the neurite of a live neuron isolated from snail brain tissue, displaying linear growth due to growth cone activity. It is important to note that growth cones in all animal species, ranging from snails to humans, have identical structural and behavioral characteristics and use proteins of virtually identical composition. In this experiment, neurons also isolated from snail brain tissue were grown in culture for several days, after which very low concentrations of mercury were added to the culture medium for 20 minutes. Over the next 30 minutes, the neurite membrane underwent rapid degeneration, leaving behind the denuded neurofibrils seen here. In contrast, other heavy metals added at this same concentration, such as aluminum, lead, cadmium, and manganese, did not produce this effect. To understand how mercury causes this degeneration, let us return to our illustration. As mentioned before, tubulin proteins link together during normal cell growth to form the microtubules which support the neurite structure. When mercury ions are introduced into the culture medium, they infiltrate the cell and bind themselves to newly synthesized tubulin molecules. More specifically, the mercury ions attach themselves to the binding site reserved for guanosine triphosphate, or GTP, on the beta subunit of the affected tubulin molecules. Since bound GTP normally provides the energy which allows tubulin molecules to attach to one another, mercury ions bound to these sites prevent tubulin proteins from linking together. Consequently, the neurite's microtubules begin to disassemble into free tubulin molecules, leaving the neurite stripped of its supporting structure. Ultimately, both the developing neurite and its growth cone collapse, and some denuded neurofibrils form aggregates or tangles, as depicted here. Shown here is a neurite growth cone stained specifically for tubulin and actin, before and after mercury exposure. Note that the mercury has caused disintegration of tubulin microtubule structure. These new findings reveal important visual evidence as to how mercury causes neurodegeneration. More importantly, this study provides the first direct evidence that low-level mercury exposure is indeed a precipitating factor that can initiate this neurodegenerative process within the brain.
All right, what happens to 80% of the mercury vapor absorbed in the body from dental amalgam fillings? It's absorbed by the lungs and passed to the rest of the body. That first place it goes is the lungs, 80% absorption. The brain, kidney, liver, lung, and gastrointestinal tracts. Half-life of metallic mercury varies depending on the organ it's in. Primarily in the general body, it is about, 58 days or so, 60 days. In the brain, several decades. That's a half-life. Now, that's not the whole time it's there. That's just a half-life, meaning that half the mercury comes out, and then you still have, the other half of that half comes out in 60 days, and half of that other half comes out in 60 days. So getting it out entirely takes a long time, particularly if it's in the brain, because a half-life is decades. So it's going to be there for a while. Symptoms of mercury exposure. You can look over this list, the delusions, and we've kind of talked about this. This is a little bit redundant, but insomnia, nerve responses, changes, immune impairments, oral manifestations, lichen planus, stomatitis, dermatological conditions. I had a friend of mine who was a dentist. His hands broke out in like scales, and he went to an alternative physician in Winston-Salem, Dr. Ward, and he found out, this is years and years ago, that he was heavy mercury toxic. So he got the mercury out of his body and his hands cleared up. So it's amazing what sometimes these things do. And it's not, has anybody here done a mercury challenge test on their patients to see, if physicians have to do it, but what they do is they take a urine sample. There's different ways of doing it, but one of the ways is take a urine sample. You take a high sulfur compound like DMSA, and then you collect urine for 6 hours, shake it up, send a sample to the lab, and they'll come back with a whole panel of what your heavy metals are: cadmium, lithium, mercury, nickel, manganese, a whole 9 yards. And it's very interesting to see that. And if you do that as a dentist, you're going to be amazed at what your mercury levels are. And lead, yeah. I started out heavy in lead because I guess my dad's gas station. But they start taking the lead out first, and this is what alternative physicians do. Then we have to get the lead out, then they go to the mercury, and there's different compounds they'll use to go after different heavy metals. But it's something you might want to hook up. One of the things you need to have is an alternative physician to work with. I mean, we have several in our area, thank God, but they're the people who are going to help you. Once you get it out of the mouth, they'll get it out of the body, and you need to hook up with them to see what your burden is and get it out of your body. Because I guarantee you, it's in there. I was, and still am. And it's something I'm constantly, we're all exposed to it. No matter how particular you are, it's still being exposed. All right, these are scientific research show the IAOMT's position statement against dental mercury in the IAOMT.org. And again, allergies to mercury, antibiotics, resistance, mercury, Parkinson's. I guess multiple sclerosis is in there. So a lot of people with Parkinson's and ALS and multiple sclerosis come in and want to get their mercury out. The first thing they do when they get a diagnosis is come in and get the mercury out, which is interesting, and it's always rewarding to work with those people. Again, there are folks that are motivated. They like you. They like what you're doing. They don't come in here and go, "Oh, I hate this place. I hate the dentist." That's not what you get. Of course, if you're doing it as long as I have, you just go, "Okay, fine. You'll be all right." Yeah, it used to be personal, but Okay, genetic predispositions. Mercury exposure from dental mercury amalgam threatens people with genetic variants. We all have, I think 50% of the population has some sort of genetic variant. Could be the CPOX4, could be APOEs. The genetic traits that have been examined for health impairments caused by mercury include polymorphisms and all kinds of different things. You can see at the bottom of the slide there. So basically what that's saying is 50% of us have some genetic variant. And when that's saying that is, we're more susceptible to heavy metals than somebody that wouldn't have those. Okay, this is interesting. We're talking about alloprotein E, and it's become more in the news lately than it used to be. If a genotype is a potential biomarker for mercury toxicity, and what alloproteins are, there's 2, 3, and 4, and they are essentially proteins in a cerebral spinal fluid that circulate cholesterol. And there's 3 kinds: APO2, APO3, and APO4. And if you're an APO2, you're in great shape because you have 2 cysteines attached to that molecule, or that enzyme, the APO. And if you're a 3, you have an arginine and a cysteine. And if you're a 4, you got 2 arginines, meaning you have no capacity to get rid of the mercury. If you have 2 sulfur groups on that, sulfur binds to the mercury, and boom, you can get it out of there. But if you're an APO4, you have no transport with that system. So you're more likely going to increase your mercury load, and also from what we're reading now is not directly related, but an increase in chance of Alzheimer's disease. So I don't know what mine is. I don't want to find out, actually, but to tell you the truth, but I'd have to quit dentistry if it's a 4. But yeah, APO2 is good to be. So that's what that's about. And APO4 reduced mercury detoxifying capacity. And a lot of times what you'll hear is some physicians, if they're not alternative, you go to your doctor and the lady comes in and says, "I was just checked for mercury, my mercury levels are low." Well, I said, what did your physician do? Well, he took a blood test and he cut some hair. Well, mercury is only going to be in your blood for like up to 48 hours, and that's after you have a procedure done. So if I cut out a couple mercury fillings, and you go to your physician the next day and he does a blood test, you're going to have mercury in your blood, even with all what we do. However, if you don't have anything like that, your mercury level is going to be low because it doesn't stay in the blood. It recirculates into the body. That's where it's deposited. So, and in the hair, you're either a secretor or not a secretor. So if you're a non-secretor, that means you are not secreting heavy metals in your sweat and in your hair. In other words, if you're a secretor, that's your body's getting rid of the mercury through your hair and through your sweat. So when you do these tests on autistic kids and they go, "Oh, there's no mercury in their hair," what that's telling you is the mercury's in their body, not in their hair. It's not coming out. So that's important. That's what part of this is about. Excuse me? Yeah, there's also other tests coming out. Chris Shade's got some things with Quicksilver Scientific. Is Chris here this week? No. Okay, that's too bad. He's a great guy, great products. But he's got a hair and, Joe, was it hair, urine, and what else? Chris? Blood, yeah. He's got a tri-test, he calls it. Yeah, and again, low hair mercury in autistic children because they don't secrete. 90-year-old patient, mouthful of amalgam fillings her whole life and no symptoms. She's a secretor. She's not hoarding it. She's not storing it. She's getting rid of it. Okay, and this is Dr. James Wood stated 25% to 50% of people have these genetic variants, as I mentioned, and which makes your ability to get rid of the mercury a whole lot less. And you got a lifetime risk of neurological damage, as I've shown the history of my family anyway. Allergies to dental mercury. Approximately 21 million Americans are allergic to mercury. We never think of allergies to mercury. I think they did the test in Baylor University and found a third of the class was allergic to mercury. That's pretty wild for dental school. Oops, I'm sorry. Most dental practices are not tested for mercury. Well, I've never tested a patient for mercury allergies. I mean, I don't need to. I'm going to get it out of there, and they're going to go to a physician and get the mercury out of their body by chelation. Health conditions linked to dental mercury allergies include autoimmune diseases. We talked about that, ALS, Parkinson's, MS, fatigue, multiple chemical sensitivities. A lot of these people, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have any perfume in our office. Staff's not allowed to wear perfume because a lot of these people are affected by that. And again, I used to think that was kind of weird, man, but that's true. Some of these people are very sensitive. In fact, you can't go in and just do a quadrant of amalgams. The physician will say, look, I want you to do one and see how we do. Because these people, they're just like it's like a bucket that's full, and one more drop, it starts to overflow. They can get worse temporarily if you overdo your removal process. All right, number of patients with health condition linked to dental mercury recover after filling and removal. And mercury's got a time-dose relationship. The more mercury you've got and the longer it's in there, the more your body's going to contain. It's not just about the mouth, it's in the body. If it's in the mouth, it's in the body, it's in the environment. Amalgam is not stable, we know that. It's made up of 5 different metals. It's a battery. It's always going to be a battery, even if it's not against a different one. Any of you guys ever used a readometer? Hal Huggins had a readometer. I've got one in the office. It was something like what we looked with the potato clock, and what it does, it measures the amperage coming off of mercury fillings. And if you got a mercury filling against a crown, and you put the probe on the crown, or the meter goes off the chart. So what we used to do, I don't do it so much anymore, but Hal's theory was you start in the quadrant with the highest amperage and then work backward. I tend to look at the worst dentistry and work backwards from there. Because I got a tooth that's cracked and I'm afraid it's going to break. I'm not quite as concerned with the amperage as I am, fixing the tooth. So we don't do that as much as we used to. But some people come in and they want that test done, and we do it. People respond in 1 of 5 ways when you remove these fillings. No change in their health, that happens. The other thing is worse of increased exposure. I mentioned that due to poor removal protocol. Even our best protocol is probably poor compared to what we're going to have in 5 or 10 years. It's better than what I started with, a lot better. But, we're not perfect, and there will be some exposure. You'll learn from Joe, we got a vacuum under the vinyl dam, we got a vacuum on top of the vinyl dam, we're breathing an alternative air source, we got ionizers, we got filters. But it's not perfect. They're going to get some removal, and some of these people with their buckets full, they will feel worse sometimes when we get this done. That's why we try not to do too many at one time on these people. You got to kind of look at that and say, well, last thing we want to do is make them worse. They won't get them out of there. If they're going, man, I got sick the last time you did this. I don't want any more of that. Better health after detoxification by the physician. That's an alternative physician. Your normal everyday doctor is not going to detox these people. They need chelation. And then after that, they get better. So just getting it out of the mouth doesn't make these people better. You got to get it out of the body. Better health immediately, that's a galvanic reaction. That's the thing I was talking about. You've got many, many thousand times more nanoamps in the mouth than you do in the brain. So these people get up and go, oh my God, you're a hero. Well, not really. Well, maybe I am. Yeah, I think I am. Some people better after amalgam removal, and particularly after the detox, as we said, with the alternative physician. This might be a little hard to read back there, but what is the risk of dental amalgam mercury exposure and human health risk through the lifespan? Well, again, this chart showing you that dental amalgam is predominantly the big actor in our body's burden of mercury, and then you got a little pie there, a little piece of pie there for food and air and other sources. But the toxic effects on people are individual. A combination of symptoms can be present. As I said, 67 million Americans exceed the intake of mercury vapor considered safe by the U.S. EPA. And in California, it's 122 million exceed the intake. They're always more stringent. So again, this is a little redundant, but it's, again, this stuff's not good. This is a little hard to read back there, but what we got is a pregnant lady. And mercury vapor released by dental amalgam fillings in her mouth and the body, partially in the brain, kidney, liver, and gastrointestinal tract. Concentration in the breast milk. Maternal mercury levels are known to impact the fetus. We talked about going past the blood-brain barrier and into the fetus. And mercury vapor, which is lipid-soluble, can cross the blood-brain barrier. Once it's ionized, it doesn't. Whole body and kidney regions are also, the kidney absorbs a lot of mercury, along with the pituitary in the brain. And mercury in the feces, that's one of the things you measure. That's how you want to get it out. You don't want to get it out through the kidneys. So physicians will design a way to get it out through the feces, not the kidneys. Again, this is again epigenetics of dental mercury, and these people have these different variances, and it's going to polymorphisms, which is going to affect how their mercury comes out. Again, this is more health where you got hearing loss. Well, I think that comes more from the dental drill than the mercury, but who knows, MS, and again, these are all put up before. Again, this is revealing risk of exposure to dentist. And this is disorders, irregular pulse, hand tremors, spasms. These are dentists now, upper extremities, neuropsychic symptoms, tachycardia, painful chewing, thyroid enlargement, fears, difficulty in writing. Increased risk of miscarriage, renal and memory losses, and increased CNS symptoms. I don't know what that got in there for. Okay. Impact of dental amalgam on the development of Parkinson's disease is still uncertain, although a positive association between dental amalgam and Parkinson's disease has been found. The patients exposed to dental mercury fillings were 1.5 times more likely to have Parkinson's disease afterward compared to their non-exposed counterparts. That's 1.5 times more after exposure. And Tom Duplinsky, he's, I mentioned earlier, he's up at Yale. He's a professor in the graduate part of dentistry at Yale. And health studies of dentists exposed to mercury from silver amalgam tooth restorations. Notable quote, it would seem prudent to advise that dentists consider these restorations that do not contain mercury. What he did a study on dentists. And if I'm not mistaken, they were retired dentists, is what I remember him saying. Do you know, Griffith? You don't know?
No.
They weren't just dentists and dental? Okay, I thought when he lectured he was talking about retired, but at any rate, you can see these are the increases in the stat of the dentist. And now he did this thing on prescriptions that were written, and as you can see, psychiatric, you got 237% increase, neurologic, 760%, psycho and neuro, 280, respiratory, 140, cardiovascular, 168% increase from dentists over non-dentists. So I don't know if you want to call it the stress or the mercury or whatever, but it's pretty obvious that dentists are being affected by this because that's the number of prescriptions being written compared to the general public.
Bill, I think this is Medicare data. They're over 65, but they're not retired. They don't have to be retired.
Okay. All right. This is a joke Joe threw in on me. If you read this thing, one way of reading it sounds like alcohol is helping us get rid of mercury. And the other way you read it, the more consumption of ethanol, the more the mercury stays in your body, doesn't come out in your urine. So, at any rate, that's, I think that's all I got, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Virtue.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you, thank you.
So we have time for questions. We're early, so there's 2 microphones. So just raise your hand, and we'll come to you. So your question is heard by everybody.
Hi. I have 2 small children. You know, I'm currently going through vaccinations for them, and I'm just wondering, what's the IAOMT stance on vaccinating? Are you just not supposed to vaccinate your children, or?
I can answer that.
One thing I'd like you to do is a World Mercury project. Is John F. Kennedy Jr., not John, but one of the Kennedys. Robert Kennedy, excuse me, Robert Kennedy. It's his organization because he had a child damaged by vaccines, so he's gotten real active politically in getting mercury out of our vaccines and to stop all the vaccines that they're getting. So many. Good information there. And you'll get an email from them every week with information on it. Right now they're all over the T-TAP vaccine, the problems that it has. So as a grandfather, I've encouraged my kids not to limit the vaccines as much as possible. You know, just don't get them. They've done a few, but not many.
Well, I think also they're working too to get the thimerosal out of the vaccines. I mean, it's not like they're unaware of it. And I also think you can order non-preservative vaccines to get around that problem.
And that is true, but there's also a problem with the number and the age they're getting them. They need to be delayed, and they need to be spread out. And a lot of them aren't even needed. I mean, why do you vaccinate a kid to a blood-borne disease that they can't, they shouldn't be exposed to? It'd have to be rape or something like that.
Like hepatitis or some of those. I mean, it's crazy for a 2-year-old to be worried about hepatitis.
To answer your question, though, we don't have an official stance on it.
No official stance. And the flu vaccines, they want, every pregnant woman just to have a flu vaccine, which are still full of thimerosal.
And they're 1/3 effective. I mean, I'm not going through that for a 1/3 effective. I don't get flu anyway.
You will probably hear some speakers on that this weekend too, a little bit. I know Boyd's speaking, so he'll probably reference that a little bit. Boyd Haley.
It's my turn?
Yep.
I would like to ask you which kind of, which amalgam filling need to be removed, which one not to be removed, which one is indicated to be removed?
I'm not sure I understand your question, but if you're asking what brand needs to be removed?
No.
I'm talking in the mouth.
Yeah.
Which amalgam fillings has to be removed, or all should be removed?
All. Yeah, as I mentioned, we use some patients.
Maybe someone that are old, they have no mercury.
Well, they got less mercury, but then I'm concerned about the tooth itself. So you got to be a dentist, primarily. That's my opinion. And what I do is I look at the worst quadrant first. If I've got a word about this tooth breaking, or maybe it goes a little further, we're looking at root canals, I'm going to get into that area first and work.
Another one question. Do you recommend if we remove the whole thing, if somebody has 10 and we go by the protocol, it's better to remove the 10?
Again, it depends on the patient. If you got a healthy patient, you're talking about 4 quadrants?
Yes.
I tend to go quadrant at a time. I might do 2 quadrants. But I personally don't do all 4 quadrants.
Maybe the quicker, the better, the less exposure?
Well, you've got to remember what their reaction is going to be after removing those, particularly if they're not working with a physician, because they could have a reaction to the mercury exposure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I do that based on the health of the patient.
Yeah.
I got a good healthy patient that just came in. I want to get these out because I don't want to get sick.
Yeah.
I'll do them all the same day. I got a patient who's
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Fighting cancer, chronic fatigue, looks like crap, adrenal fatigue. You go slower, quadrant at a time probably.
Joe, I would say, though, with our protocol that you guys are going to see, I hope, this morning, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That, to me, you could take them all. I mean,
but sometimes just how long they got to be in the chair, too.
Yeah.
More than anything.
I mean, there's lots of factors. But with our protocol, 1, 10, 15, it doesn't matter. All those old arguments about, work on certain days of the month, work on this side of the mouth first, charges, that's all negated.
Hal Huggins used to say you have to wait 7 days per quadrant, and if you could not cross the midline unless you were on sedated. I thought, what the heck sedation got to do with crossing the midline of mercury poisoning? But Every dentist has a little bit different for reasons for doing that time-wise. If a patient comes for a long distance, I'm probably going to do more than I would if they're around the corner. Their health is a very big aspect of it, and maybe what their physician is telling me to do too. They may not want a whole quadrant done at a time, but I generally do 1 or 2 quadrants, left, upper, lower left, something like that. But you know.
Is
Anything
it
else?
okay to go with another question? Well, I have something to say about this. I don't know what it is in United States, but in my state in Canada, we really have to be careful not suggest the patient to have all his amalgam removed. It really has something that has to come from the patient.
Oh, yeah.
Like you're there to give them the service if that is their choice. If the fillings are fine, if the patients want to keep them, you don't push them in that. Sure. They will decide when they're ready.
Well, okay, I'm sorry. You had more to say.
Go ahead.
Let me be clear about that, because I do not tell anybody they got to remove their mercury fillings ever. Don't ever do that. Now, if you've got a broken tooth, then that's pretty obvious that something needs to be done. If you got cracks in the tooth, that's why I said intraoral pictures are worth $1,000, because they tell you exactly what's going to happen to that tooth. But never do I tell people they got to do this. They come in, 2 kinds of people. Either I'm just their dentist, or I'm their biologic dentist, and they come in saying, I want them out. Fine, I'll do that. But when somebody comes in just wants a dentist, now I'm going to look for what's ugly and what's broken, and that way. So you got to ask a patient what they. First thing I sit down and say, what can I do for you? Mm-hmm. And then they'll tell you, and then I know where to go. But no, don't ever tell them, and don't ever claim they're going to get better from their whatever their ailment is, because you don't know that.
My question is about nursing moms, because my feeling is that when babies are really small, you better not touch the fillings. But when babies get older, sometimes moms just nurse twice a day, and they have milk in their freezer, and they will just throw the milk after having amalgam removed for maybe 1 or 2 drinking of the baby. What is your opinion about that?
Well, I have had occasions where mom could go ahead and pump the day before the removal, refrigerate it, and then, but I don't encourage that. It might be a situation where we've got a toothache, we got to do something, but I would not just sit down electively and remove amalgam fillings on somebody who's nursing.
But you know that if she's full of mercury in her mouth anyway, she's gonna have mercury in her
Well,
milk.
she's already got it in her body. I mean, it's already there.
I agree. Well, mom that wants to do that, then we will have them, pump, save some milk. We'll go ahead and do it, and then they will. I tell them 2 or 3 days.
3 days.
Yeah, about 3. That's just to be safe. But with our protocol, still, I'm not too worried about it, and that's why I will go ahead and do that for them. One more.
Yeah. Just about the readings of the metal and the currents. Mm-hmm. I did it, but I didn't know much how to interpret the numbers.
I don't know either. I just look for the biggest number and go from there. Now, if you go back and remeasure that, it's going to be lower because you've taken some of the electrical charge out of that. If you measure it a week later, it's different too. Hal Huggins gave us a lot of good things, but some of that stuff, I don't know how scientifically it was based on how much science, but yeah. Some people think it's gospel. They come off the internet and they want it done that way. It's fine. Yeah. No problem.
You have a question?
Yeah. Talking about integrating patients that are there just for regular dentistry versus ones that are coming in, if we're going to be taking on the safe amalgam removal protocol, I'm thinking, okay, there's the patients that want that and the patients that don't necessarily want that, but I want to protect myself and my team. So if we're going to be gearing up ourselves and doing this protocol on patients that don't really care, are we still going to be making them do their part of the protocol?
Everybody gets the same treatment.
I've never had a patient like that.
Okay.
Never.
Well, everybody.
I've been doing this a long
answer your question.
time.
Everybody gets treated the same.
Okay.
Whether
And
they
then
know, whether they understand it or not. I mean, it's all everybody.
Okay, perfect.
Because
And then
we're
I'm
protecting
We'll talk
ourselves.
about claustrophobia when I'm talking, because some of them are going to be very claustrophobic. So.
And then I'm assuming you're going to go into cost.
You'll see the whole
cost of what we should. Okay.
You want to get him?
I have a question. When you do remove an old amalgam, generally at the dentin beneath the amalgam is stained significantly.
Yeah.
How do you handle that situation when you know that there's metal leakage into the
Yeah,
the tooth?
what I'll do, I'll just use a caries indicating solution to see if, number one, there's any decay there. And then I'll generally take a round burr or something and kind of get as far as I can without any nerve problem. But, you know, you can go all the way down to the nerve and still have that dark area. So, you know, I just try to take, you know, as much as I can without damaging the tooth. But yeah, you're right. There's probably mercury still in that substance, that dentin. But you know, you want to get it all out, and you're going to be doing endo or extraction and implant. Yeah. Excuse me?
If there's any type of sealer that you put over that?
No. No. Because it's going to be absorbed by the bloodstream. It's not coming out of the tooth as much, but it's going into the dental tubules. Yes?
So I have a question just to clarify about the nursing. So if you have a nursing mom coming in and she has an emergency with an amalgam that's got to come out, so you're saying that you are going to ask them to maybe pump a day before, store that milk, and then what again is the protocol for after? Is it waiting for 2 days?
I don't think the
Or is
academy
there not
has a protocol. I think if you ask 10 of us, we probably all have a little twist on that. Again, I would only do it in an emergency situation.
Absolutely.
And
right.
And I'd ask mom to pump and then do what we got to do and then go back. Again, I don't care how good our systems are; they're not perfect. So the mom is going to get some mercury vapor, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We know that when mercury is taken out, you're going to find it in your bloodstream for 6 hours. And then it's out of the bloodstream and it's, you know, into the body, or it's out of the body. There's some excreted, some goes in. So we don't. I tell them 2 or 3 days.
So I'm relatively new to this, so there's a plethora of negative effects of the mercury. So I just wanted to know if there's any research that showed improvement for somebody who suffered from Alzheimer's disease or a child who's autistic, if you have research that shows improvement, because Alzheimer's, obviously there's a ton of research that there is no cure and there is no improvement. So I just was curious if there was any research that did show improvement.
I don't know that we have any research, but I can tell you in my practice, I've had many patients with Parkinson's and MS that have definitely had improvements. I can't say that with ALS.
You know what? Once the damage is done to the neurons by the mercury, you know, his body doesn't do a very good job in repairing it. So for those 2 you picked, those are like our worst chronic ones. Yeah. But with MS, arthritis type ailments, they'll come with all kind of things. They tell you goes away, rashes. I've seen a lot of that happen. Okay.
Question over here.
Does IAOMT have any data regarding the quantification of mercury being released under crowns that may have the core amalgam underneath it? Any data that would suggest that that mercury is being released into the system?
I don't know that we do. Griff, do you know?
Yeah, we do.
Do we?
Well, remember, Hal Huggins did it way back when. There's some retrograde exposure there's several literature studies from the 70s, 80s, 90s showing it goes that way through the tooth.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what we're talking about, the tattoo.
No vapor escape.
Mercury tattoos. Yeah, the blood's picking the mercury up.
Coming through the tooth.
I had a patient come in last week or the week before who has breast cancer, fibromyalgia. She's in her early 50s. She has a number of PFM crowns that have good margins. And she, like you say, people come in pretty well, understanding things that sometimes we have to look up ourselves, of course. And the margins are good, better than most PFM crowns that I see. And good x-rays show that there's no mercury subgingival, and she was ready to have them out. She knew she had mercury fillings in the past.
They usually know.
She's not sure that the dentist took them out before doing the crowns, and she was ready to have them removed, and I just hate to
Well,
remove I'm just wondering.
I see that a lot. And you know what I asked the patient? I said, did the same dentist do all these restorations? And then a lot of times they'll say yes or no, either one. And I said, well, if the same dentist did them, what I suggest we do is take one off and see. And I understand, I'm going to destroy this crown. I can't put it back on. But if there's under one, there's good chance there's under the rest. But that's your call. I'll tell you if I can visibly see it, but I can't tell you there's mercury under that crown or not until I take it off. And that's their call. Then they make the decision. I got a patient right now who's got 10 PFMs. She wants them all off because she suspects it. And again, I said, look, let's take one off and see.
Just real quickly, one point here to make. You guys are all dentists, okay? You're doing dentistry. So don't make this such a big deal. If a patient comes in, they got a mouthful of amalgams, your job is to do an unbiased examination and say, out of these 10, whatever, these 5 are failing. Bad margins, recurrent decay, whatever. Meaning that if any other dentist saw it, you could stand your ground. These 5 are bad. The other 5 might be considered optional. So say that.
Yeah.
They're optional. If you'd like to replace them, I'm happy to do it. It's your call. Done. End of story. You don't have to get in the whole, this is killing you, this is going to cause it. Don't do that.
Yeah,
You're dentist.
I tell them, look, this is the obvious. Let's get rid of the obvious. And then if you feel better or don't feel better, then we can go to phase 2.
I tell all my patients get a treatment plan. They come in and tell me what they want. So my holistic patients are coming. Yeah. They want their amalgams out. They want their metal out. A lot of them want their root canals out. So I give them a treatment plan for that. But I tell them which teeth from a dental standpoint that another dentist would tell them are mandatory or elective. And I mark it in their treatment plan. These are mandatory teeth. That's because there's decay present. They're marginated or they're broken teeth. There's abscesses there. That's mandatory stuff. Everything else is elective. But if they want to do it, don't argue with them. They'll just go somewhere else. They'll come to me, and we'll do it. So really, if she wants all the metal out of her mouth, she's got cancer, I would agree with it.
Just let me please ask this question about the injections. How we colonize the injections, vitamin C with the removal? Should we do it during, before, after? It has to do with the number of the teeth we need to work on. All right.
That varies. Not all of us do vitamin C drips. So we don't have any, you'll see our protocol, we don't even talk about that at all. That's up to you if you work with other practitioners as far as before, during, and after. Vitamin C has nothing to do with chelation. Nothing. Nothing. Because it is so supportive to the body, to the immune system, to how the process goes. But it has nothing to do with getting mercury out of your body.
We're just giving y'all fundamentals today. Some of these questions are more advanced. You'll hear more stuff about this in other lectures.
I just had one comment about the breastfeeding. In our office, we recommend that the mothers pump some, store some up. Once they have stuff taken out, any medications, whatever, they should pump and dump for as long as they can afterwards, until they feel it's clear. I heard you're talking about 2 to 3 days. At least a day is a start.
I don't know what to, everybody.
Well, it's definitely going to be mercury circulating that we've, entered into their body. So if they can store a couple days worth of breast milk up, then they should pump and dump afterwards.
Well, they've got mercury in their breast milk anyway if the mercury fillings are in there. But you are going to exacerbate it if you remove one.
Hey, Doc. I'm Trino from Nebraska. Just started practicing about 3 years ago, so this is all new to me. One of the questions I have is in regards to elective dentistry. If a patient comes to me and says, hey, Doc, I want all my silver fillings removed, or mercury fillings, whatever you want to call them, any special consent forms that you have them sign in regards to covering your butt?
The IAOMT has consent forms you can get that covers that, yeah. But I mean, I'm telling the patient, look, I'll tell you if it's cracked and or decayed, but if it's a functioning mercury filling, and the patient kind of came in because they told me, they'll say, well, if it's broken or decayed, I want it fixed. And I'll say, well, does that mean you're not concerned about the mercury fillings in your mouth? No, I'm not. Then they're going to get the broken and decayed teeth fixed. And I might leave a mercury filling in that quadrant because that's not what they wanted.
Okay. And then one more question. In relation to chelation therapy, if you do have an amalgam restoration like a buildup underneath the crown. If you do chelation therapy, is that going to leach out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll talk a little bit about that this afternoon.
That's, yeah.
All right,
that's
we're going
right.
to take a break.